Scott Peters, and I'm a sales manager here with Rexel in Northeastern Ohio. So welcome to our webinar this morning around FactoryTalk Edge Gateway. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Keith and Tom, who will be our presenters today. Keith?
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. Let me start by saying welcome. And due to my previous role at Winkle Electric, I know and I may have already met some of you, but for those who I haven't met, I look forward to working with you in the future. I am a product specialist here at Rexel, and part of my role here is to focus on Rockwell Automation's information software solutions. And one of those solutions today I'm going to introduce is actually a core offering in the information space from Rockwell called FactoryTalk Edge Gateway. All right, so just kind of an overview of today. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the product, what it is, how it works, and then at the end of the presentation, I'm going to do a short demonstration. So as an intro, FactoryTalk Edge Gateway, it's going to connect operational technology, and in short, I'm going to call that OT, to information technology, which I will call IT, destination systems, and it can help improve data collection and organize everything in today's data demanding world. Due to the different technologies in OT control systems and IT control systems, a lot of the time they're not managed by the same individuals, which can introduce a challenge for obtaining the correct data. So that brings us to the why. So a lot of time, IT has little to no access to system data or control data. Also, IT has little to no knowledge of control system application content. Industrial customers collect vast amounts of data, but most of the time they're not immediately useful until they are aggregated onto a database table, mapped with application context, and provide operational context. The importance of application context in smart manufacturing, I think, has grown immensely in the last few years, and its relevance is driving OT convergence with IT systems. So a lot of times you need that interconnection piece from IT to OT, and more or less, it's now capable of handling data-intensive operations and analysis in today's world. Another big thing is, especially from an OT content, is about inconsistent timestamping. So when there's, a lot of reports and things that need to be ran, there's timestamping discrepancies all over the reports. Well, FactoryTalk Edge Gateway can help with this. And more or less, OT has really no data management skills. They're usually tasked with keeping the plant floor running, keeping the machine operational, and really kind of put that on the back burner if there's any ask from an end customer, if you're an OEM, or if you're an individual working for an end customer and getting tasked with mining some data from a control system. A lot of times you don't really know where to start. And again, as I mentioned, most operations teams have no background skills in data management, so using traditional methods can become very time consuming and very much frustrating when the data is asked for. So the driver for this is OT needs a tool that can help them, provide the right information, with correct meaning and origin. Another thing is it has to be very user friendly and usable so that IT personnel can evaluate for higher level comprehensive insights. So what Rockwell released for this is a product called FactoryTalk Edge Gateway. This allows users to contextualize their data with information models right at the edge. These models can, become the single source of truth for contextual streaming data right into your enterprise and cloud applications. It also, I think, helps alleviate some of the challenges that I've previously mentioned going forward. So this is the overview. And in the next few slides, I'll mention the three phases that we have here, which, let me skip the connect phase, the apply phase, and the enable phase. So the what and how. So we need for data, but legacy systems, number one, are not equipped to collect. So you need multiple different programs are needed to collect and organize your data. Certain software packages, more or less, are built to meet specific objectives and not others. And again, most software packages work differently, but when you're working with this new product, FactoryTalk Edge Gateway, we can use one software package to collect and organize relevant data. Very fast. A lot of these control systems demand, very fast intervals of pulling data from a system. So what the gateway can offer is high-speed synchronous data collection. And the nice thing about this, there's a variety of options in how you can configure data collection. You can do it at a rate, which allows you to specify the pull rate, and the pull rate can be anywhere from 500 milliseconds all the way up to every 5 minutes to it. Triggered, so there's actually an event-driven to trigger data, which allows you to collect for, let's say, there's an AOI in the control system. You can enable a bit on that to trigger the event to log the data to the system. You can control the on and off state of the data collection bit in the ladder logic. So your trigger can be as simple as perhaps turning on that bit every time there's alarm, to writing various complex ladder logic that considers multiple inputs to decide when to collect the data. And what I mean by that is you can get very creative on how and when you can trigger events and data into your system up to the IT space. A combination of both. As I mentioned, there's an on-change bit, so when a value changes, you can move it. There's also groups that can be assigned in the node based off a parent that allows data collection to be configured of an entire set of data. So you can set one grouping and have that same rule apply to all of the additions going forward. And again, that big key piece that I mentioned earlier, reduce that need for IT technical expertise and surface control data. So what FactoryTalk Edgeway gets you is you get a single box configuration, very simple information models to work with. And again, I'll mention a term here, automatic creation of application content using FactoryTalk Edge Gateway Smart Objects. I'll show that in my demonstration today. And not only that we can collect data off of Rockwell controllers in the control system, but utilizing some OPC connections and Kepware Enterprise, we can also enable some collection on some third-party devices as well. So with all these key points I've mentioned here, smart manufacturing is modularizing analytics, MES, and IoT software portfolios. FactoryTalk Edge Gateway supports these modern software architecture by providing a flexible plant model-based transaction, managed data presentation, and data exchange layer for OT assets and IT applications. So again, that we're driving for that one-stop shop to configure everything and to start passing information through in a usable content format. So what's the workflow? So there's 3 simple steps, right? So in the first release of the gateway, obviously it's going to provide a user-friendly interface to help us facilitate that collection of the control system information, organize it into what we call a model, a logical structure per se, and how to forward it out to some most common applications for storage, whether that be a database, a cloud application, etc. So phase 1, as we have the connect phase. So this simplifies and automates the process for collecting industrial equipment data across different machines, devices, or automation assets at the source. To take it to the next level, again, as I mentioned previously, and will I also show in my demonstration, with the use of actually Logix controllers and Rockwell's Premier integration, we can add a smart objects tool that we can help make this process even faster and even easier. The model phase. The information model, it can be tailored to asset hierarchies. And where this is in typical deployments, is there's assets that you can identify for certain areas, which again, I'll show in my presentation. And it can be used as a baseline for a template down the road. So if you have different machines or OEMs that there's data collection needs that on a specific piece of equipment, you can set this up once and utilize the models over and over so that you have that consistent mapping of tags throughout. The map phase, as we call data egress. Now that we have everything organized together in the system from our previous two steps, we can now package the information model to map it to a database or any other application. Which again, from this system here, we're able to enable business insights and operational excellence across the enterprise with no custom code or complex procedures. So roughly from this, using FactoryTalk Edge Gateway, we can streamline this process 30 to 50% time savings utilizing. Now let's talk about the smart objects within this system. So we create smart object content. The smart object configurator, it allows us as users to build one or more information models in a single controller to represent their process. So if you're a controls engineer out there, if you think about how a Logix program structures, the control represents really nothing that's really useful at an analytics level. Additionally, unless there is a strict data naming and management strategy in place, names and locations are not always clear, making it difficult for users to determine which data points are important. So what I mean by that is a lot of times OEMs and people that write code, they name something that is useful to them, not for an IT individual or a temperature. A lot of times there's like a 40 character sometimes, or maybe not that long, but 20 character tag that's tough to distinguish to what you're actually talking about in the system. This step here in the smart objects allows us to eliminate that step to give some context to the tags that you're looking for. Similar to building an information model at the Edge Gateway with other Rockwell or third-party data sources, building a model in the control layer, again, allows that OT personnel who knows the process very well, and they can help best to identify the data that is important. And again, those names can also be abstracted to better describe the data. So this is the automatic sync section. The smart object configurator also allows users to find how data is collected in the controller. The collected data is logged into a buffer in the controller that the Edge Gateway automatically knows how to read. And because we're logging the data in the controller, this allows us to use collect data at a much faster rate than we thought was possible. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, that high-speed synchronous data. And again, as I also mentioned, you have the specific rate, the triggered AOI, and the on-change event on how this data is collected, all configured inside the Logix controller. So this, again, with this automatic sync, multiple ACD files in a Logix controller have similar content are automatically discovered and connected in the Edge Gateway system. And we can automate synchronized data transfer to the Edge Gateway controller, and then it automatically dumps it in the information model populated with timestamps. And lastly, once we have everything organized, contextualized, we know where we're getting our data from, we can map it. Okay, so what this allows OT domain experts, an information model that is built, it's already attached to the definition with a timestamp from the PLC. Now we just have to select the destination on where to send it for the IT individuals or whatever database or cloud systems that are used for other applications within enterprise. And again, with this method, roughly 80% time savings with FactoryTalk Edge Gateway utilizing those smart objects. So I know I mentioned some data sources that are able to be utilized throughout the system. So some that from this original release and the release that I will show in the demo is 1.02. So you have, again, as I mentioned, the FactoryTalk Smart Object content, the ODV standard for all Rockwell controllers that are out there, which is Ethernet IP driver that you can select from. So any Ethernet IP capable device that has Dable available to grab from it, we're able to use. If you're familiar with a FactoryTalk architecture, there's a live data which is held within the FactoryTalk services platform that you can set up within the admin console. So if you have a server system, you can utilize that connector to pull data from. If you're using third party or if you're using Rockwell's Kepware Enterprise or Kepware EX, OPCDA for some of the third party connectivity to the Kepware Enterprise. And where this is helpful is if, as I mentioned before, you have the legacy content out there, and let's say you have a SLIC 505 and you want to enable some Ethernet connection to it, you can utilize OPCDA. There's also ways with gateways that talk to OPC with different things. So we can take some of those legacy pieces of equipment if we're not ready to make that transition to new controllers that have that data on demand. Kepware and OPC is a good driver for that, especially if you have third-party stuff out there as well, along with your Rockwell content. Just as an overview, the Edge Gateway software, you can configure it, connect, contextualize, and I'll show in the software in the demo. Some data destinations, right? So our outbound connections. So one of the most common ones as of today, we can use a SQL connector. We can store a narrow format data into a custom table within a predefined database in SQL or SQL Express. And with this release, we actually connect to 5 SQL connectors at the same time. If you're familiar with the PTC platform ThingWorx, a ThingWorx connector facilitates streaming data to a Thing model so that you have different entities and properties with model contexts and tags that can be identified within ThingWorx. Only one ThingWorx application can be configured at this time. And with this release, there is a cloud storage, which is in the Azure I/O Hub. And then there's, I believe, one connection to a cloud connection with this release. So Edge Gateway, it's sold as a software license, and in comparison, can be considered a very lightweight software to design and deploy applications. Installation on a compute surface capable with the following Windows-based operating systems is required. So, and again, Rockwell, these are all validated and tested within a Windows 10 Professional 64-bit, Windows 10 Enterprise, Windows 10 IIoT, Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2016, and Windows Server 2019. And there's a variety of different modules that we offer from Rockwell that these can be installed on. There's a compute module, which can fit right into your 1756 ControlLogix chassis, VersaView 5400 industrial PCs, Rockwell's acquisition of awesome hardware. So in this case, it would be VersaView 6300 panel PCs or box PCs, any industry PC with Windows operating support, and if you have a server class operating system. So this can reside on many different pieces of hardware to fit your needs. So actually, this is actually being utilized within Rockwell's facility for their contactor line. So as you can see here, time-saving insights from the previous slides aren't just based on customer and delivery feedback. Rockwell has actually implemented this on their contactor line in Milwaukee, at their Milwaukee headquarters. And they intend to implement it at other manufacturing sites as well. And as you can see, as the workflow, as I explained earlier, they're utilizing smart objects to allow us to create synchronous transactional data records right there in the controller. As you can see, there's the ladder logic over here. And with the Edge Gateway, they're able to consume that data model built within the smart objects in the controller, and then they deploy it right to a ThingWorx dashboarding system. So something that's actually being used in Rockwell, which I think is pretty neat for this type of application. So with that being said, that ends and gives me the short overview to give me some time to go through the presentation. But is there any questions before I start the demo?
The support, is it support OPC UA as well?
Not in this release.
Okay.
Future releases, yes.
But then is that planned for future release? Is that in the roadmap?
That's correct.
Okay.
I have to see when the dates are, when they're targeted, but I know it is released. It is going to be coming, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Keith, I don't see any hands or any messages in the chat right now.
Okay, great. I'm getting my VM set up here, so just take a minute here and I will get it up on the screen. Okay, let me stop presenting. Let's share the screen. Okay, just give me a confirmation, Scott or Tom, that you guys can see the software here.
We are good.
Okay, perfect. All right, so where I'm going to start, just kind of give you an overview here. So this is the overview page of the FactoryTalk Edge Gateway. Just like any piece of FactoryTalk Edge Gateway software, or excuse me, any Rockwell software, it is activated utilizing FactoryTalk Activation Manager per se here. So you have a license status that you can absorb. After the demo, I'll give kind of an overview of the flavor of tags that it introduces. So I'll start just in my environment here. I'm utilizing an emulator controller. It's a Product Studio 5000 Logix Emulate 8. It is running, I'm sure if you've been on many Rockwell webinars or demonstrations, the InstaFizz application in the background here. And then I also have a SQL database set up here as well with the Management Studio that when I make a connection to the SQL server, I will show you where the table gets created as well. So let's do a demonstration on how to build a data flow, create a data ingress driver. Let's do a model, and we're going to do an outbound data egress application. So, and then in this first round, I'll do it without the smart objects. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to data sources here. And by default, Rockwell, there's a couple running in the background. I have a SIP driver, as I mentioned before, the Ethernet IP. And this is that FactoryTalk Live Data connector within the services platform. So let's start by adding a data source. And we can just call this instant viz. So what I'm going to do first here is I'm going to actually do a live data shortcut because I have one created in the system. And by the Premier integration, it knows what driver. This is going to be a local path. I give it a minute to. So we're going to do the InstaFizz S. And just kind of show you where that application context is. Cancel out of this real quick. I'll select local directory. So as you can see here, the application built from the live connector, and I'm just going to verify that I have the right controller data server connected here. So here's the FactoryTalk links. I'm going to go to communication setup and make sure my emulate controller is selected from the data topic that I have here. So actually, we're going to run it from, I want to use slot 4 of the emulator as you saw on my rack there. So I'll make sure that's applied and say, yes, we're going to update that path. And now we have a data server collection here. So now I can go back to the Edge Gateway software and pick that as my data collection method driver. So let's go back to add data source. I'll just minimize this for now. I'll call it instant viz. I'll do a FactoryTalk Live Data shortcut. Driver for browsing. There's the FactoryTalk Live Data. There's the local. There's the InstaFizz application. And again, you have this checkbox here, use browse path for data collection. So it should be able to find that same data topic that I showed previously. Come on. All right, there's our data topic. So I'll populate the namespace and you'll use that browse for data collection. I'm going to hit save here. All right, and then we should get a collection path. It's starting to try and populate the system here. Okay, we got a green. That means it sees the connection and is okay. Now we just wait for it to load to populate that instance. And you can go back and edit any type of changes as I did previously. So while that's loading, we'll go ahead and set up a model in this case. But let's add a model for this system. Let's call it a packaging model. Because as we said, we want this to be able to identify the assets that we're working with. So we're going to call this a packaging model instance. Okay, and we're going to configure this model by going to here to edit. Now, based on that driver that we've selected, we have some stage tags that we can pick from. So there's the live data one that we're going to look at. Do the InstaFizz. Okay. Come on. There we go. I'm running this on a Windows 10 operating system on a VM, so it's a little slower than usual. So let's find a tag. Let's say I want I want a motor temp data. So here it is. Here's a tag within that controller. So we're going to select motor temp to have stage to be identified in the model. So I'm going to save that one here. And I'm going to add the node to this for data collection. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go add node. I'm going to call this motor. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to bind this node to this. So you select here, say, hey, here's the tags in your system, and what model and node do you want to bind it to? And we're going to hit bind. So now we have a motor temp here. We're going to save. So now we have to identify those properties that I mentioned about So we're going to call this property prop update rate. Okay. Save that. Now we go to our applications. So this one, I'm going to make a SQL connection. I'm going to call it SQL app2, and I have to bring up my little cheat sheet here. So we're adding a database. So basically all I do here, there's a predefined database. Typically this will be done by your IT department if you're not managing the database. Just need a name of a database instance that they're going to create for you. In this case, we're going to call ours Edge Gateway. We're going to call this Data Gateway. Then we have a username and password. So this one by default SA, and then oops, need a domain here. SA. Okay. And we'll need a crypt, and you can also select an option that if the connection to the ACM, or excuse me, of the database gets lost, you can actually buffer data on this PC to do a store and forward once the connection is made. So we'll save that. Oops, okay, let's see what the warning is here. I probably put in the wrong password. Let's see. Okay, just got to reconfigure. There we go. Okay, so now I'm connected here with the green that we're connected to a database. Okay, so as you can see here, no more errors or warnings. So I made that connection to a database. So now from that instance there, we've already built a model with the data that we want. So now what we're going to do is let's write it to the database. So we're going to go to configure. So now what we're selecting here is how we want our models to be assigned, right? So we built one currently. So I'm going to do is say, okay, here's our packaging model. And the one I'm going to select is motor. We're going to do the packaging model, and we're going to use the motor temp tag. All right, I'm going to hit save. All right, so as I mentioned previously, there's different update rates. As you can see on the right here, this is saying that data collection is on. What our update rate is, so as I mentioned, there's 500 milliseconds to 5 minutes. In this instance, I'm going to select 10 seconds. And instead of on a data change, I'm going to select a polling interval. So it constantly, every 10 seconds, is going to log data to this database. So I'm going to save that model. So that should have been deployed. As you can see here, new configuration, one count, motor temp, product update. If you want to, like I said, do a property update to different things and set it as a parent node, just kind of want to show that capability within the model. So from this, we should be able to go directly to the enable data flow. And one thing I want to mention about the tag count, as you can see, the tag count that the license go for, it's not counted until you display something to your outgoing connection. So you can build a million configured tags. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend that, but they're not officially counted toward the license count until you actually deploy it to an outbound connection. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit data flow in this instance, enable the data flow. Save. Nope. Sorry, gotta. Oop. Sometimes, like I said, lags a little bit here, but we'll stop and start the driver. I still have a connection error. Let's try again. Edge Gateway. Password all good. Deployment. They rate 10 seconds. And we're happy. Okay, so now let's refresh it again. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that, just a little slow. Okay, so as we see here with the 10-second interval, there's that timestamp of synchronous data. This quality is based off an OPC standard, meaning a 192, which means quality is good, and value 84. So every 10 seconds, I will show in my SQL table now that we should be seeing a table name of data gateway in the database of Edge Gateway. Okay, so let's go here. Let's refresh. Refresh one more time. Edge Gateway is a predefined database that I had made. There's our tables. Okay, so here is our new table that we've created from the software that it's imported into here. So now if we select the 1,000 rows, we should see some instances of tags being stored into here. So as you can see from the timestamps, packaging motor, here's the value, here's the quality, here's that timestamp. And as you can see, based on the interval rate, every 10 seconds, this is being logged into the database. So in that instance, that is without the smart objects. And I believe, how am I on time? Okay, good. It's 10:40, so this is going to fall right into place. So now that's a process that you can do if you don't want to build any smart objects in your controller. But we want to do things faster. We want to go faster. So let me show that same instance by building an actual smart object instance. So let's go back to our controller, and just so everyone knows, by default, Smart Object Configurator is used with versions of Logic version 28 or greater. In the newer releases of Studio 5000, they're included in the tools in the installation. But if you have 28 or 30, you would actually have to go to the website and download the Smart Objects Configurator to be installed on the machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go offline here, because the smart object instances, since there's a lot of backing tags and a lot of things that are implemented, needs to be done offline first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Tools. Here's our Smart Object Configurator. And you saw how I build the models in the software for the update rate, etc., everything in here. Well, now I'm going to do that same instance here. Now this is pretty typical. Basically what this is saying is the project is missing the base requirements. Again, those are those backing tags and everything in the logics needed for it to run. So essentially what you're going to do here is you're just going to hit yes. And what we're going to do, and I should have done this in the first place. Actually, let me just make a new task for this, or a new program. I'm going to call it Smart Objects. Parent none. We're going to do a new routine. SO objects. All right, so now we have a main routine in this instance here. And now what I'll do is let's go back to the Smart Object configurator. Yes, let's install the base components. Let's do a program. I'm going to set it to Smart Objects, routine SO, and we're just going to put it at rung 0. So we're going to insert that in. As you can see over here that they're making various backing tags and instructions for user-defined data types on how to buffer and make the connections to the system. And it automatically ported an instruction over here for me. Okay, so that's step 1. So now let's build an information model. So I'm going to call this packaging. I call it pack smart pack smart backing. And we're going to put it again in our smart objects program, and we're going to insert it at the end. We're going to add. Okay, so here's our model. So let's add a node to that model as I did in the modeling tag in the FT Edge Gateway. So let's do new node. And this is our timing. So we'll call this, I'll just call it motor system. You have to create a backing tag for everything. Motor system backing. We're going to put it at the end here. So how do we want to do this? So we're going to also do this a periodic 10 seconds. And again, there's the unprogrammatic. You can change a bit. Just for timing purposes, I'm just going to do a 10-second periodic update on this. So I'm going to hit add. So that's our node system here, part of our parent node, right? That if you put multiple tags and instances under here, you can reference this node for the same type of data collection. Again, this is where you can stack things as well. There's a different combination of both. You can have it update every 10 seconds and or a value change. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to keep it very simple. So right now in the smart objects, there's a dint, and you can actually do another node on top of it where I talked about stacking the combinations. You could do a real value or a string currently. So what I'm going to do is simple fact. I'm just going to do a dint, which is that motor temp that I selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this temperature motor 123 underscore temp motor temp backing. And then the source tag, if you go back to the gateway here to see what the tag was that we used. Let's go to here. And motor temp, and you can actually verify it in the Logix program as well too. So just so you know what tag I'm picking it from. We're going to select motor temp again, which is 84. Go back to the object configurator. So source tag, paste, objects, we'll put it at the end. We're going to base it off the parent node, which essentially is that interval of a pulled data selection of every 10 seconds. Let's add it. Okay, so our information model is ready to go. So now how do we get it into the FT Edge Gateway software? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this system back into the emulator. Now, just so to note as well, within your system is the smart objects only works with obviously a Logix controller and an Ethernet IP driver, which I already have pre-configured. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, as you can see, we have a status of not collecting, but that's okay because we haven't set it up in the gateway yet. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing with the smart objects now. We're going to go add new data source. We'll call this smart objects. And we're going to reference a ACD file. So here's the one that I've used here. I'm going to open this up. Now I have the driver for collection, which is SIP. Now, in your guys' instances, you'll usually select an IP address. I'm using just a loopback address because it resides on the same machine. So this is my connection path. But if you had a controller that was, let's say 192.168.1 dot, whatever, that would be your collection path. But since I'm using an emulator, I want to reference that. That's the connection path I have to use here. So if there was any questions about that. All right, so it sees it, it's loading. Let's let it for it to be populated. So what we should see here in the next step, that the model should already be created, and we'll double check to see if this picked it up in the controller. May take a minute. I may have to relaunch the software just to upsmart it, but okay. So right there, here's our model. I didn't even have to do anything. As you can see, there was nothing there before. It already built our model and understood it in the gateway software and published it right to here, right? So everything for our nodes and everything, all motor system data. Remember, I went through all those steps. Well, since we have the smart objects, boom, we just skipped this step because we already did this. So now it's already in the application context. So now I just have to send it to a different area. I could send it to a SQL, and just for time's sake purposes, since it's 1050, I'm going to add it just to, there's a test client on here just to show data coming through, and I'll say smart objects. Oh, yeah, you can't have underscores in that. Save. And the same instance, so we'll configure it. What model do you want to use? I want to use my smart object model that I created in the controller. Save. Then we have to deploy it to an outbound connection. And we're basically saying, here's your current configuration. Here's a new configuration of the egress going out. It's the pack smart deploy. And we should be good here. And then you can enable the data flow. And again, may take a little minute. Yeah, we have the configure tags in here. 10 seconds for it to show up. There you go. And if you go in, it's that tag being referenced. Let's go back to the controller tags here. Let's go to motor temp. Let's just change it to 101. And based off that interval, you have to wait for the 10 seconds, a little delayed, but it should update that interval. And as you can see in our smart objects configuration, we have that bit has gone away because the Edge Gateway was able to identify that connection to make it to the controller. So we are communicating with it. And here's all the backing stuff. Here's the motor temp tag that goes with the model for the organization for an OT person to configure that. And all the IT personnel has to worry about is what the model is called and what the temperature is of that motor. Let's go back to the software here. As you can see, right there, 101 updated with a good quality of 192 at a timestamp throughout. So that is FactoryTalk Edge Gateway. I will leave it open up to questions. I know we have about 8 minutes left of the presentation. And I guess one other thing I want to mention as well is if you use any type of the software before, like a transaction manager, currently in this release, it's only a unidirectional communication. So we can't do from, let's say, a cloud or a database down to the controller. We have different software packages as well if you need that. But eventually, again, as part of that roadmap down the road, it will be bi-directional communication back and forth. This is just the first release of it. And then my last thing I wanted to show on the presentation, that's just the simple demo end of it, is let me stop sharing here. Let's go here. Back to my PowerPoint. The licensing model to understand. All right. Share. Okay, can you guys see my presentation again?
Yes.
Okay. Just skipping through to the last few slides that I have here. It kind of shows the. Okay, so licensing model. These can be purchased through the e-commerce portal. There's different flavors of how many tags. Like I said, it's by tags of egress, not of tags of configuration. There's a subscription level of 100, 500, 2,500, and 10,000 tags. Again, it's activated by FactoryTalk activation. The license counts are not additive. What that means is if you buy 100 and you buy another 500, you don't have. That doesn't mean you have 600 tags. It picks the highest license value in the system. But work with us. There's ways that Rockwell offers what they call step forward to go from different tiers of software packages. My guess they would just honor that for this as well. And again, the tag counts don't apply in design environment, only when deployed to the egress data, which I mentioned previously. So, as right on time, I said, ready, set, go. In closing, investing in smart manufacturing with products like FactoryTalk Edge Gateway, it increases an organization's capacity to further innovate for the future. Deploying systems across all departments, enables organizations to gain experience, which can then be called upon during future adaptations of new technologies and methods. Investment in innovation will not only be more efficient and effective, but I think most likely will have greater returns. And for something so small like this, it's a snowball effect. You solve a small problem from an original small investment. It usually will have great potential down the road to keep the investments churning in for even bigger outcomes to do bigger things. Remember, start small, plan big. And I have on here, just so I'm a big Back to the Future fan. I say be ready for the future. Well, in reality, be ready for the now. So I thank you for sharing an hour with me. I wrapped it up right in time. I know I didn't leave a lot for questions, but please feel free to share any sort of information you have, and I will send it back to Scott. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, great stuff there, Keith. At this time, does anybody have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or chat in a question. Take yourself off of mute.
Hey, Scott, this is David.
Yes.
Why would I use this over Transaction Manager? I didn't see any advantages. Is it less costly? Or what advantages would that have over Transaction Manager if I'm going to SQL?
Great question. And that's a great point. So more or less, if you've already been down this road as far as transactional or Transaction Manager, so you have to look at a solution comparison where things at. And to answer your question about the costing, yes. So 200 tags, or 100 tags for a FactoryTalk Edge Gateway license is around $300 a year versus Transaction Manager, what can get a little bit pricey as far as standard. And I think you're a minimal 1,500 tags. So you just have to identify the use case for this. So for someone starting out who doesn't want to go to that full transactional manager type of application, I think you just have to find where the comparison comes into play. But you're right, there is a lot more that Transaction Manager can do than this software. But in some instances within facilities, maybe they don't want bi-directional communication, which Transaction Manager 100% can do, right? If they just want to dump something in the database from a control side starting out, then yes here. But again, transaction manager, I agree, is a lot more powerful and there's a lot more things it can do. But we just try to fill something in the space here to kind of have that first initial step into things without, making an investment like transaction manager and really having, to learn that, because that software I think can be a little more complicated as far as setting up, ODBC connectors and things like that. Where this makes it simple. A lot of this stuff is streamlined, pretty simple, I think, from a user standpoint.
Thanks, that makes sense.
Hey Keith, there's a question in the chat, and it says, "Is the software license subscription based? And it's per device, per tag, or other licensing?"
Yeah, so it's let me go back to my previous slide here. I know I'll show, but yes, it's a subscription per year. It's subscription only. There's subscribed by tag, okay, not device, right? And as I mentioned in my previous presentation earlier, the tag is not counted until it is sent to egress. So you can build a ton of models with, if you have a 100 tag license and you have 200 tags of models, until you actually deploy it to an outbound connection, that's when the count goes towards the license count. And like I said, they're not additive either. So you can't buy 100, another 100, and the third 100 to get 300 tags. Is if you need, if you go through your system, you design, say how many tags you need for data collection, and we come up with a number of 250, then you're going to have to purchase the 500 tag license. And yes, it's a subscription per year.
Great question in the chat. All right. Anybody else? Please take yourself off of mute, raise your hand, or chat it in.
Hey Keith, just a real quick one again. If I have 250 tags across my enterprise, that's multiple sites, multiple PLCs and controllers. Is that still just the 250 tag license I pay for?
Yes.
Okay, that's cool. Thanks.
Yep. Like I said, until I remember in that section, and then until you set up enable data flow and hit that deploy button on the outbound connection, that's where the tags start to count. So again, like I mentioned, if you have 5, and again, depending on your network infrastructure, again, this can do up to 5 SQL connections at a time. So 5 different databases in this release. Okay,
we're at top of the hour. I don't think I don't see any more hands or any chats. So I do appreciate your guys' questions today. Thank you, Keith, for your presentation. And at this time, we're gonna say thank you and have a great day.